On June 22, 2006, Klay Armstrong was severely burned when he walked past a power boiler. At the Cedar Springs, Georgia paper mill, there have been multiple workplace accidents, including fatalities in August of 2003, April 2006, and again in October 2013. OSHA fined the paper mill $102,000 and $63,000 for the August 2003 and April 2006 incidents, respectively. In this insider-exclusive Justice in America Network TV special, Justice in America, Klay Armstrong story, our news team is on location with Jane Leger, partner at the Ferguson Law Firm in Beaumont, Texas, to show how she obtained a landmark settlement on behalf of Klay Armstrong, an employee of the Cedar Springs paper mill who suffered burns on 68% of his body, spent 6 months in a medically induced coma, and underwent 80 surgeries as a result of a boiler explosion in 2006. Here's Klay to tell you what happened on that fateful day, June 22, 2006, with his sister, Tracy Armstrong Evans, a nurse, and Klay's legal guardian to share their experiences of the aftermath of how Klay's Brotherhood of United Steelworkers and Jane Leger and her legal team got justice for Klay.
I was out there at my regular job at the Cedar Springs paper mill in Georgia, and I was a mechanic apprentice, really. And we got our plans to do work that day, and I was headed up to the lock box to put our locks on. A couple of steps after I got on the third floor, it's just blurry, loud noise, and felt like somebody pushed me. And by that time I heard the boom sound, and I realized that, you know, the boiler exploded, and I was caught in the middle of it. So it slammed me up against the brick wall, and usually in the past I've always heard, I've never seen it, but I've always heard it just go and come real fast. And a couple seconds later, I was still being cooked, so I figured I needed to find my own way out of here. And I did the drop, stop, and roll, and that didn't work because I had nowhere to roll into, so I had to roll back into the fire to roll out of it. And by that time, the fire was gone. They said it lasted 8-9 seconds or something.
I'm a registered nurse and paramedic and in Tallahassee. And I was actually taking a continuing education class, a trauma class, for my job. And one of my head nurses came to the classroom because somebody from Georgia Pacific had tried to call the emergency room to tell me that my brother had been burned. Well, as an emergency trauma nurse, I was like, no big deal. The flight nurse that was a friend of mine actually landed and called me and told me how bad it was. When I got to Gainesville, about 2.5 hours later, I saw my brother, and he was on a ventilator, and he was already bandaged up because they wouldn't let us in for a long time because they had to do so many things to him. And as a nurse, I was over at ICU. I could just look at the monitors and him, and knew the severity of his burns. I just knew that he wasn't going to make it. 2 big burly guys came shortly after and explained that they were the president of the union at Georgia Pacific. Handed me all this information, packets and business cards and phone numbers. And my brother was he loved his job. He loved Georgia Pacific. Most of all, he loved the union. And I didn't know one man from the other man. But I thought, well, if the union president's here, I think he can go in and see him and then go back to the mill and tell him what he saw. I thought the people at the paper mill would want to know. So we had to dress up in protective gear. And he went in with me and just started crying. And I wanted to go back to Georgia Pacific and tell everybody there what he'd seen. When Klay first got burned, Georgia Pacific was very helpful. We'll put your family up in a hotel. We'll help with gas to get to Gainesville. Well, this went well for a few weeks. Then it was, we'll still pay for the hotel, but we're not going to give you gas to get to Gainesville. Then it was, okay, y'all got a big family, lots of brothers and sisters, and we can't have 2 hotel rooms. We need 1 hotel room. Then about a month and a half into it, it was Klay still alive, and well, we're not going to give you any food now. We'll just give you the hotel room. And then after about 3 months of him being in the hospital, it was, we're not going to do this anymore. Basically, they thought that Klay was going to die, and die early on, and he didn't. So, once they stopped paying for fuel and food and hotel, I realized we needed to have, somebody had to have our back, because as much as Klay thought Georgia Pacific would stand up for him, we realized once they quit paying for everything because they thought he was going to die, we had to have somebody that stood up for Klay. The union was amazing. They came immediately after the accident, and brought a check the first time they came for whether it was going to be for hotel or food or if we needed to pay our mortgage at home. And they continually brought a check every week. My understanding was that they had a fund at the mill that everybody would put into, all the union workers, for when there was something like this. But it went above and beyond monetary with the union workers. They would go and mow my brother's grass. They'd look after his dog. They built him a shed while he was in the unit. Put some of his hunting stuff in. They would just go by his house and realize this man lived long, and they just saw that things needed to be done, and they would just do it.
Yeah. Word got put out that my girlfriend, fiance at the time, or my sisters or brothers, they needed gas money, or tires were wore out on the car, needed to pay for a hotel. Word would get back to the union brothers, and if anybody needed $300, $400, they showed up the next day with $700, $800. No questions asked, no nothing, And my sisters or whoever tried to tell them thank you, they like, nope, that's what we're here for. We'll look after our own. Man. It would have been hard for my union brothers and sisters. Even after I got out of the hospital, they still came by and helped out. They still offered to drive me to doctor's appointments and therapy and to take the burden off my family, And it would have been very difficult, and my sisters and family and all that, they never really had experience to deal with a union. They didn't ever really understood how a union, they thought I just paid to work, But now they tell you that they damn proud I was in a union, because they don't know what they would have done without a union helping me out.
One night in the hotel room, I just started looking through all the things that the union president had given me. And then a emergency task force person from Georgia Pacific from the district came down because they didn't live in Donaldsonville. Came down and talked to me and told me that this is the law firm that the steelworkers and union workers use, as Provost and Humphrey. You need to call them. They understand about mills and coal miners and steel workers, and they're for us. I never needed a lawyer before, but my brothers and sisters decided that if we didn't make the decision now, the ability to make that decision would be lost. So we called, and they were there the next day.
Jane has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world and repeatedly wins. The lessons learned from the Georgia Pacific's paper mill disaster are a testament to the excellent investigative work that Jane and her legal team has performed and continues to do each and every day in every single case. She and the Ferguson Law Firm are dedicated to uncovering the hidden catastrophic factors that put our fellow citizens at risk and wreak havoc on important sectors of our economy. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Beaumont, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Jane Leger to the show. Welcome to the show, Jane.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your law firm.
My law firm is the Ferguson Law Firm. We're located in Beaumont, Texas, but we handle cases all over the nation. I work with my partners, Chip, Michelle, Cody, and Mark. And the interesting part of the story, I think, is that Chip and I have worked together for over 20 years. We started together at a different law firm, and then Mark came to that firm, and Cody came to that firm, and then we split off and started our own firm.
Well, you have a beautiful building here. We are here today about one of your clients, an amazing client. His name is Klay Armstrong. Tell our audience a little bit about Klay. What kind of guy is he?
Klay Armstrong is the most remarkable, resilient Superman kind of guy that I've ever had the pleasure to get to know. He took a tragedy and turned it into a positive thing. He was horrifically burned, over 70% of his body.
And he was working at a power plant in Georgia, right?
He was. He was simply walking by a boiler. His work that day had nothing to do with the boiler, but there was a safety device on the boiler that had been bypassed. And as he walked past the arc feed chutes, that's just essentially where the fuel that causes the fire in the boiler. As he walked past those chutes, a fire erupted inside the boiler that traveled through the chutes and came out of a little inspection door that was about 6 by 4 inches, and it just blew a flame torch, almost like a flamethrower, right at Klay, and it pinned him up against a brick wall.
He's lucky he's alive.
He is very lucky to be alive.
He had, what, 80 operations?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, in these plants, there are supposed to be inspections on a regular basis.
There are.
As you know, we have done stories where plants blew up, equipment had to be retrofitted, it wasn't. There's nobody coming out and inspecting because, you know, it costs money and that sort of thing, right? Tell us about your investigation of the case from the time that you got this case. How long did it take to get all the discovery to go to trial, and how difficult it was to get that discovery?
This case took almost a decade, 8 years. And one of the reasons that it took so long is because it was very difficult for us to figure out what happened. Pretty early on, we discovered that 9 days before Klay was so horrifically injured, the boiler had been certified by an insurance inspector who filled out a form and turned it in to the state of Georgia certifying that the boiler was safe.
But he really didn't inspect it, did he?
No, that so-called inspection allegedly happened 9 days before this boiler blew back on Klay. And I just, in my wildest imagination, could not imagine how a boiler that did this much damage could have been in a safe condition 9 days earlier.
Mhm.
So we really started digging in. But the mill owner was giving us, pushback and not telling us the truth about what happened. And finally, about 2 years after Klay was burned, a gentleman that worked at the mill retired. And he called Klay and he said, I need to tell you what really happened that day.
And that's oftentimes you find these in these cases, right? Where someone does the right thing. And probably had they not done the right thing, you wouldn't have that information, right?
Yes, this man had retired. He told Klay that he wanted to tell him what he knew about what had happened, and Klay called me and said, can you get to Georgia to talk to this gentleman? And I said, absolutely, let's go. And by the time the case went to trial, this, I'll call him a whistleblower, had cancer. And so coming to trial was physically very difficult for him.
Mhm.
He was on treatment. He had to bring a special blow-up seat to sit on because he was having radiation on his colon. But to have a witness like that was just invaluable to the case.
Tell us a little bit about some of the action in the courtroom. I understand that the judge had to admonish some people regularly.
He really did. There was, well, first of all, there were 2 mistrials in the case, and those are interesting stories in themselves. But the admonishment from the judge came when the insurance company's in-house lawyer took the stand. And this lawyer just would not answer a question directly. He kept wanting to lecture the jury and explain why they shouldn't be held legally responsible for what happened to Klay. And so the judge, when it first happened, he sent the jury out and instructed the witness and even told the witness, you're a lawyer. I know that you're licensed in 2 or 3 states. I can't remember how many at the time, but he said, I know that you are smart enough to understand this instruction, and you need to answer. If the question calls for a yes or no, you need to answer with a yes or no. And the lawyer just would not listen to the judge. And so the first day of testimony, the judge admonished him 2 or 3 times. And then at the end of the day, when he sent the jury home, the judge had a serious conversation with all of us. And he told the lawyers and the witness that's also a lawyer that they needed to go home and research and study about his powers of contempt, because the judge was going to go home that night and look up how much power of contempt that he had.
Was he thinking about jailing them or what?
He did not say that at the time. He just said he was going to look at what he could do. Well, the next day, that night, we went home and I told my team, I said, we need to get ready to see a completely different witness tomorrow. I anticipate that they're going to go and shift their strategy. And much to my surprise, they showed up the next morning and the lawyer got back on the witness stand and started with the same conduct. And so the judge sent the jury out and called the lawyer down in front of him and said, you're being held in contempt of court, and sentenced him to 3 days in the county jail.
Did he serve the time?
He served 1 night, and then the next morning they flew in a criminal defense attorney from Atlanta who, fell on the sword and told the judge it wouldn't happen again. And so the judge let him off after 1 night in jail.
Just amazing.
I've never seen it. And I tell you, it was after everything that company had put my client through, it was hard to not just jump up in the courtroom and rejoice when that happened, but I knew that would be inappropriate. So it took everything in this, all 5'2" of me to stay calm in that moment and not react. But I did sneak into the courthouse early the next morning and pulled the bailiff aside and asked, did he have to put on the orange jumpsuit? And he said he absolutely did.
In these kinds of huge cases. I mean, 8 years, right? 2 mistrials. It takes a lot of money because you are a plaintiff's lawyer, you know, to prosecute this case. It takes a lot of people, experts, right, to put this together. These kinds of cases your law firm looks for. In fact, we talked earlier in the show, you'll be getting involved with another case, an explosion nearby. How do you select the cases that you're going to take on? I mean, what are the criteria you look at to decide whether you want to do this story or not?
Well, we look at corporate wrongdoing. And when we feel like a corporation has made a conscious choice not to do the right thing, not to follow the laws that are in place, and that choice has resulted in serious harm to a person, to a community, those cases are important to us. We feel like that nothing brings the true facts to light like a lawsuit. And we have teams of lawyers. We review hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of documents. And we bring...
And getting those documents is sometimes very hard to get, right?
Very difficult.
Yeah, because they resist. They lie.
They lie, they hide. And in Klay's case, it was one document in particular that really turned the case into a racketeering case. And that was a letter from an insurance broker that referred to the insurance coverage that the inspection company had to have under state law to have authority to report the boiler's condition to the state. This letter referred to that insurance policy as a shell policy. And we had suspected that it was not legitimate insurance coverage, that it was a scheme or a fraud. And that letter just was like the icing on the cake. It was a shell policy. It was not a real insurance policy.
Was anything ever pursued criminally on that?
No.
That issue?
No.
It could have been, though.
It should have been, but when the state was informed, the insurance commissioner testified in favor of the insurance company.
Of course.
What does that tell you about how far the corruption extended?
Kangaroo court.
Had we not been in front of Judge Ronnie Joe Lane, we may have had a bigger problem on our hands than we did. There were a lot of highly technical arguments made by the insurance company that the bark chutes, the fuel delivery chutes where this fire escaped from, were not really part of the boiler, and therefore they didn't have any obligation to inspect it. Our judge had a really keen mechanical mind, and he realized that that was just a ridiculous argument, that you can't have a fire in a boiler if you don't bring fuel to it. So the fuel chutes necessarily were part of the boiler that should have been inspected. So we had an absolutely wonderful judge. We had some governmental agencies that I don't think did what they should have done.
Well, congratulations on the case. It's really, really amazing. And you changed the lives of a lot of people. I think they're inspired when they see a case like this. I mean, think about it. 2 mistrials, 8 years, and you got a great result. And you changed the lives of many people. Justice may be slow, but it's coming.
The person who's also changed a lot of lives is Klay Armstrong, because he has taken his recovery and started a charity for disabled children and wounded vets. So he pairs veterans that are struggling emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and he pairs them with a disabled child to go on turkey hunts out in Georgia together. Yeah. And the vets will come back and tell Klay that watching an innocent child who, through no fault of their own, has some hardships, gives them a new mindset and a way of looking at their issues that helps them overcome a lot of their personal trauma.
Congratulations again. Thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.